I'm writing in to tell you about something that happened to me during my combat training at Fort Benning, Georgia. It was in the middle of August of 2003 to be exact. I was taking a night land navigation course, which is a course where you go out at night and have to plot points on a military map with minimal light, using only a compass and a protractor. The purpose is to get us used to being out at night and navigating at night. So there I was in the middle of the course at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was trudging through some deep brush. There was a row of trees on either side of the brush, and I was walking right down the middle of them. As I was walking, I started to hear something to my left. It sounded like it was walking too, but through the trees, and it was making a low sound, like a growling sound that sort of rumbled the earth. I thought that was kind of strange, but I just kept walking, thinking that it might have been some kind of a tactic meant to try and disrupt our concentration, basically to test us. So I just continued on with my tasks, but then I heard it again and again, and it was closer and closer each time. By my calculations, it was about 40 yards away, so at that point I decided to investigate it. I mean, maybe this was a test to see how we handle these things. So I made my way through the brush and towards the trees. I walked towards the noise, and soon enough I was able to make out a large figure lurking in the trees. It had its back turned to me, but I was close enough now that I could see its muscles moving as it stood there doing something. I assumed it was a drill sergeant or something, but then I quickly noticed that it wasn't wearing any uniform at all, and it was hairy as hell, sort of like a bear would look. But this is Fort Benning, and we don't have bears or anything like that. So I thought to myself, what the hell could this be? And that's when the thing turned around. And my God, this thing had extremely bright yellow eyes. They were so bright that they almost glowed in the dark. I mean, man, these things were bright. And its face looked like a dog's face with long fangs sticking out of its mouth. It stood about 6'3" or 6'4", I would say, and had really broad shoulders. It also had very long arms. Its hands looked kind of like a human's hands, except for the fact that they had really long claws coming out of them. And the only other detail I can remember is that it had reddish-brown color to its skin. I stood there in utter amazement. When I did, this thing let out a growl that sounded like the devil himself. It was so loud and deep that it shook my very soul. This thing then started to run towards me. Now at this time I should have been running as fast as I could to get away from this thing, but for some reason, I don't know why, but for some reason I just stood there and watched it come towards me. When it got about 10 feet away from me, it stopped dead in its tracks. It looked at me with those bright eyes, and then all of a sudden, it disappeared. It wasn't there anymore. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. And when it did, all of the sounds around me went silent. No crickets, no birds, nothing. It was like everything just shut off once this thing disappeared. I stood there for a few seconds in utter amazement, and that's when I decided to get the hell out of there. So I booked it back and began to tell the others what had happened. They didn't believe me at first, but then they saw how shaken up I was. They knew I was telling the truth. So they took me back out there with some flashlights and weaponry just in case we ran into the thing again. But when we got there, I could still feel its presence around me, but no matter where we looked, we couldn't find anything. We stayed out there for about an hour looking around, but nothing turned up. I don't know what this thing was, but it wasn't human. It wasn't human. That's the one thing I can say for certain. So after looking around, we just headed back to camp, and as we were walking back, I noticed that there was a tree right next to me, and on it were these long scratches that went up the tree. They looked like they had been made by really long claws, and I noticed that there was some sort of a yellow, reddish substance on them. I couldn't figure out what the scratches were, but I did notice that there was a very foul smell around. I don't know what that was, but it was definitely some kind of a marking left by something that seemed to still be close. I didn't tell anyone about the scratches. I didn't want to look like a lunatic and say what I thought about them. But I did look at them, and I still think about them today. So after that happened, we all went back to the camp and stayed up for the rest of the night, just in case this thing came back. We kept our flashlights on at all times, and we had our guns out just in case we needed them. But nothing else happened that night, or any other night during that course. The only reason why I'm telling you this is because there are a lot of people out there who say that these things exist. I want to tell you that I now know they do. Before I even saw it, I could sense that something was wrong. It was a warm, sunny day, and I had just gotten off work at the local supermarket. At the time, I lived near the city of Corvallis, Oregon, which is about an hour east of the Oregon coast. I had recently purchased a used car that I was totally excited about. I got in the car and started driving down the road towards home, but then decided I wanted to keep driving around in it for a bit. So it was about 2:30 in the afternoon when I decided to turn onto a dirt road that led towards the woods. I knew the road well and had driven on it periodically when I didn't want to head straight home. So I drove about a mile down this road until I realized that it was stupid to have brought my new-to-me car on this dirt road, so I looked for somewhere to stop and turn around. And that's when I came to an old logging trail that went off to the right. There was still plenty of daylight left, so I changed my mind about leaving and decided to just park and walk a bit on the trail to see where it went. I followed the trail for about a quarter mile or so when, all of a sudden, everything seemed unnaturally strange and quiet. I even stopped walking when I noticed how quiet it had become. No birds were chirping, no squirrels were running up and down the trees. Nothing at all was happening. It was dead silent. So that's when I started to get this uneasy feeling inside my gut, like something was about to happen. So I decided to turn around and just head back to the car, which was still visible from where I stood, even though it was a way off in the distance. But as soon as I turned to walk back to the car, that's when I saw it. A flicker of movement off to the side. I squinted in the sunlight and looked into the trees, and there, about 20 feet away from me, standing behind a tree, was this creature with its cheek pressed against the tree trunk, looking straight at me. At first I didn't know what the hell it was, but after staring at it for about 10 seconds or so, trying to figure it out, it dawned on me that this thing looked exactly like a Sasquatch. My first thought after realizing what it looked like was, holy shit. My heart immediately began racing and I felt like I was going to pass out. After realizing what it was, I immediately turned around and started running back to my car as fast as I could. When I looked back over my shoulder, I was horrified to see that it was chasing me down the trail. It ran faster than anything I've ever seen. This thing moved so fast that in a matter of 10 seconds or so, it had covered the same distance that took me 30 seconds to cover. I ran as fast as I could until I reached my car, and I can only assume that it didn't actually want to catch me, or it easily would have. In fact, it was no longer in sight at this point. So once inside my car, I locked all the doors. I sat there for a few minutes trying to catch my breath and calm down from the experience. At least I felt much safer locked in the car. And then after about 5 minutes, when I finally got the courage to start the car and drive off, this creature came running out of the woods right next to where my car was parked and stopped dead in its tracks. And then it looked at me through the windshield. It stood there blocking my way for several seconds, just staring at me with its mouth wide open like it wanted to say something but couldn't speak. It looked exactly like how a gorilla looks when they have their mouths wide open, except this thing had extremely long white teeth. And it also had long black hair all over its body, including its face, which made it hard for me to tell the exact shape of its head. The hair on its head was long and stringy looking. It also had a very pronounced brow ridge that made it look even more intimidating. Its shoulders were broad and it had a very muscular body. I'm not sure how tall it was, but I would guess around 7 or 8 feet tall based on the size of its body compared to the trees around it. So after staring at me for several seconds, it just turned around and ran back into the woods, where I can only assume it lived. So after seeing this creature up close, there is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the things people have been reporting on your website, Lilith, are indeed real. I've come to have no doubt whatsoever that this thing I saw was a genuine Bigfoot. After seeing it for myself, there's no way I could even convince myself otherwise. I mean, I've seen plenty of bears, wolves, and other animals native to the area, but none of them looked anything like this. I'm not sure if you believe me or not, but there's nothing anybody can say to make me think otherwise. This creature was real, and it was right here in my own town, which totally sucks. I'm not going to give out my real name because I don't want any trouble, but I will tell you that I'm very credible, and this is 100% the truth. I know it sounds crazy, but it is the truth. I'd be more than willing to even take a lie detector test for somebody or whatever else they would need to prove what I saw was real, but I guess that really can't happen until I feel okay enough to share my name. Thanks for listening. If I hadn't seen it for myself, I never would have believed it. The year was about 1978 or 79. I was about 15 or 16 years old. My mother and I were driving home from visiting some friends one night in our '74 Impala. It was dark. The roads were winding and hilly. We were on a long stretch of highway about 30 miles from home. The highway had a long, sweeping turn to the right, and we were in the middle of that turn. My mother was driving, obviously, and then suddenly on the other side of the road, in the field by the edge of the woods, something big and dark ran out from there and into the road. It was too far away for me to make out any details, but it was big, and it was moving fast. It looked like a big dog. It looked like it was going to run straight into the side of our car, and I remember saying, "Look out, Mom, there's a dog in the road." But it didn't hit us. It stopped at the last second, turned around, and ran back into the woods on the other side of the road. I was actually amazed that we had missed it, but I was also relieved that we didn't hit it. My mom said, "Did you see that?" I said, "Yes, but I don't know what it was." We talked about how strange it was for a dog to be out in the middle of a cornfield like that at night, and how lucky we were to not have hit it. A few minutes later, we came around another turn in the road, and there, beside the road, stood this huge thing, at least 7 feet tall. It had its back to us as it peered into one of those little farm fields where they grow just enough corn for the cows or pigs or whatever to feed on. It looked like some kind of big ape standing there, with its arms down by its sides. The fur was dark brown or black. It was very impressive looking, but also scary. I told my mom to stop. She stopped the car immediately and backed up a little bit. We both sat there for a few seconds trying to figure out what we were seeing. We were scared, but also curious. And to tell you the truth, since I was young and stupid, I was even thinking that I wanted to get out of the car and go up to it when suddenly it turned around and looked right at us. Well, that did it for me. I was now officially terrified. It had a human face, but its eyes glowed red like a cat's eyes in the headlights. I remember thinking right then that if we could see its face, then it could see ours. I ducked down into the car as fast as I could so it couldn't see me, but I could still see it. The creature stood there for a few seconds looking at us, and then it turned and ran off into the cornfield on the other side of the road and was gone in just a few seconds. My mother had a look on her face like I've never, ever seen before. She started the car and we drove home as fast as we could, amazingly without getting pulled over by a cop for speeding. When we got home, we went straight to my stepfather, who was a county sheriff's deputy. We told him our story and he just laughed. He said it was definitely a black bear. He said they do get that big sometimes. I don't even know why we thought he would believe us anyway. He definitely didn't. But I had seen the thing with my own eyes, and I knew it was not a bear or any kind of animal I've seen before, but I didn't dare argue with him. And to this day, I've barely told anyone the story. I don't even talk to my mom about it. Well, until I'm sharing it now with you. When my grandmother was alive, she told me a scary story about something odd she had seen one night. She passed away in 2007, but up until her death, she swore her story to be true. Upon telling her story, she knew that nobody would really believe her and just think she's a crazy woman. It was sometime in 1960 that she lived in a 2-story apartment in Stockton, California. Mind you, my grandmother was a straight and narrow woman. She worked for the state of California in downtown Sacramento, didn't drink or do drugs, and she was extremely educated. She also wrote novels. One night, she was having issues sleeping, so she got up in the middle of the night, a bit after 2 a.m., closer to 3. She kept her curtains shut, both for privacy and because her street light in the corner shone into her living room. She was headed to the kitchen when a shadow came across the slit in the curtain, so she went over to investigate. She peeked outside. She saw this creature, or man, or dog, or werewolf. It was standing on the corner just under the streetlight, so it was lit up. She was frozen in fear. She said it was a beast that stood at least 6 to 7 feet tall. It was covered in head to toe in hair and had a face of a dog. Its legs were funny looking, like backwards, yet it stood and walked on 2 legs, not 4. It lifted its head to sniff the night air. It stood there for a good 5 minutes before walking off into the dark. She was so incredibly terrified by the encounter that after that, she would never go out at night and had extra locks put on her door. A werewolf in Stockton, California? It's a hard story to believe, but she had nothing to gain by telling her experience, and she only told us family. Very creepy indeed.